The Civil War was a key moment in American history, setting the U.S. on its current path. Slavery was abolished, the nation unified, and soon America pursued a global empire. But what if the war went differently? What if the South won independence? Well, in the most realistic case, the Confederacy would be a paper tiger, stumbling through the years as a slave-based agrarian state until it got conquered or collapsed, like Romanov Russia without a powerful central government. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. How could the South have won? Well, it's worth pointing out that the South fought pretty well in the first place. Under the leadership of Robert E. Lee, Southern armies scored a number of key victories, while the North spent much of the conflict looking for comparable talent. But these victories obfuscated the fundamentals of the war, which were in favor of the North. The Union had greater population, greater industrial capacity, greater infrastructure, not least to mention a stronger navy. Plus, Britain and France would never have joined the Confederacy in a war since they had alternative sources of cotton under their control and a lot of trade with the Union as well. This being the case, it's not realistic for anybody to expect the South to conquer the North. Robert E. Lee should have looked more toward Rome's Fabius than Carthage's Hannibal. But Lee didn't need to look back 2,000 years for an example, but just a few decades. In the Revolutionary War, the United States played the defensive game. Willing to retreat, Washington wore down the British. That's how independence was won in the first place. Now, in real life, Lincoln almost lost the 1864 election to a pro-compromise candidate, but key military victories turned to electoral victory. If the Confederacy played a defensive game, though, the 1864 election would have been a lot closer. Now, I think 64 is too early for war exhaustion to bring the Union to the negotiating table, but if the war kept going until 1868 with no clear victory, I bet Vice President Andrew Johnson or somebody else would win on a campaign of a negotiated settlement. By 1870, the Confederacy would be independent, not with all of its original territory, but most of it. So, what next? Well, the Confederacy would not be prosperous and a powerful force. During the war, the Confederacy suffered from extreme poverty, and this continues even if it secures independence. With Britain and France developing alternative sources of cotton in their colonies, the South also loses its domination over that trade. Importantly, the Confederate Constitution explicitly forbade the government from imposing tariffs to promote industry or from investing in any internal improvements to facilitate commerce, except for ports. So there's not going to be any Confederate industrialization. The Confederate Constitution also explicitly prohibited the government from abolishing slavery. This being the case, the South remains a predominantly agrarian society with landed gentry at the top ruling over large populations of enslaved African Americans with poor whites caught in the middle. The North wouldn't be a good place either. After losing the war, the North enters a period of prolonged political crisis and national doubt. Republicans blame domestic traitors for losing the war, while Democrats blame African Americans for the war in the first place. The U.S. government is viewed as illegitimate, with the right of states to secede proved by the war. While the U.S. struggles to impose its rule over Native Americans in the West, who would probably be aided by the South, California and Utah, which are far from the core of the United States, secede and form their own independent countries with ties to British commercial interests. As the years pass, the North likely recovers thanks to its industrialization, whereas the South stagnates. Slave rebellions are frequent, so states formulate systems of absolute military rule, probably inspired by Germany or Russia in Europe. Any challenge to white domination is met with absolute force. The South can't afford any changes to its stiff social hierarchy. Fearing reinvasion by the North, the Southern Army is the only government institution that functions to any degree. With all these domestic woes, the CSA attempts to redirect attention to wars of expansion. Now, in real life, many Southern leaders wish to conquer new lands to expand slavery. Northern Mexico would have been the best contender, with the CSA conquering then colonizing the North in the second half of the 1880s. It also supports filibuster expeditions to the Caribbean, which only worsen tentative relations with Britain. Cuba is also a natural target, with the planter elite there representing a distinct class which wished to perpetuate its domination over Afro-Cubans who were recently freed from slavery by Spain. The key moment of crisis comes in 1895. That year, Cuba launches its War of Independence against Spain. Just like the US intervened in real life, the Confederacy finds a convenient excuse to launch its own invasion of Cuba. The Union and Britain, seeing this as a challenge to their own immense trade interests in Cuba, declare war. This war doesn't go as well for the South as the one in the 1860s. it's much less equally matched, with the North mass-producing Gatling guns and using its now extensive telegram and railroad networks to advantage. The Eastern Front turns to a quagmire of trenches and barbed wire, but American dreadnoughts travel up and down the Mississippi, bombarding fortresses. Meanwhile, the British Navy imposes a blockade and focuses on defeating Confederate forces in Cuba. After 4 years of war, the Confederacy is forced to surrender, losing the states of Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and a part of Tennessee. Texas is made an independent state thanks to British diplomatic pressure. This victory results in a swell of patriotism in the North and cynical revanchism in the South. The Confederacy, in response to the defeat, passes emergency measures to strengthen the military and industrial production, with German advisors guiding the process in factories staffed by enslaved African Americans. The defeat in the 1890s reveals all the structural problems of the CSA. Impoverished whites, resentful of domination by landed elites, begin to listen to the words of a bearded German economist. Tensions remain high over the next 10 years, especially in conflict over influence in Texas. The Anglo-American alliance is cemented, while the CSA steals its ties with Germany, Britain's largest enemy. Tensions are high in Europe as well, especially as the Ottoman Empire retreats from the Balkans. When Bulgaria and Serbia plummet into war in 1913, Austria and Russia rush to defend their allies. Austria drags Germany to fight Russia, which then drags France to the war. When Germany launches its invasion of Belgium to attack France, Britain then comes to Belgium in France's aid. The North and the South, seeing the rest of the world plunge into a great war, find a convenient excuse to begin anew their feud, probably something to do with shipping or something. The Great War lasts several years, just like in real life. The North expects to crush the South again, but dives instead into prolonged trench warfare in areas with low railroad coverage and dense foliage. New technologies such as poison gas and airplanes are put to use. The South, desperate to make up for its low population, sends conscripted African Americans to the front lines at gunpoint. For a whole generation of whites and blacks sent to die in the trenches for a war they don't believe in, there's one answer: mutiny. The Southern Army shatters to pieces, sparking a Southern Civil War. The Union marches through the chaos, occupying Richmond, while revolutionaries seize other cities. From here, I could see a few possible scenarios play out. In one situation, the U.S. brings security to the war-torn South, finally ending slavery and political exclusion of African Americans. Southern states are reincorporated into the Union after a few years, with Texas, Utah, and California opting to join voluntarily later on. The U.S. eventually joins World War II with Britain and Germany against radicalized France and Russia. In the other situation, the Union struggles to occupy the South for several years before being forced to retreat. This leads the way to a new socialist republic in the South. Now, this might then trigger a second civil war in the Union between socialists who are sympathetic to this republic and right-wing veterans clubs, with the latter ultimately winning and a military dictator rising to power, kind of like what happened in real life in Germany and Italy. America then invades its neighbors in a conquest of the continent, joining World War II with France and Russia against Britain and Germany. But what do you think? Comment below which scenario you think is most likely, and if you have any comments or suggestions. If this video made you think, make sure to like and subscribe.